All right, welcome back, everybody. Dynasty Mirror Search for Huru. Let's get some more people in the chat room. There's a lot of background noise on your end, Brother Morgan.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's the plane flying. It's gone now.
Okay. All right. Cool. Perfect. All right. Dynasty Mirror Search for Huru. Ya Ankara Akan. What's up, brother? Today I have a special guest, Brother Anthony Morgan, with the historical preservation. What is it again, brother? I'm sorry.
Historical Preservation Society of Liberia.
Historical Preservation Society of Liberia. And I appreciate it, Miracle. And so basically we're gonna pick up from where we picked off, where we left. We're gonna pick up from where we left off yesterday. And so a lot of people were upset in regards to the commentary or the narrative that Professor Davis painted in regards to Liberia. You know, so Brother Morgan is going to really break it down on how, you know, why America should not take the majority of the blame that they're taking. And the reason why I say that, and the reason why this is titled, Would Liberians Be as Resentful If It Were White People Who Colonialized Them? I've been to 10 or 11 African countries, okay? In a lot of these countries, number one, colonialism is not even taught. Guys, press 1 in the chat room if you can hear me. I want to make sure you guys can hear me. Press 1 if you can hear me, you guys. So in a lot of the schools, they don't even teach about colonialism, number one. Number two, the colonializers, whether the British, the French, the Portuguese, whoever, they walk around the cities freely. You know, they're very arrogant. You know, they're very open about it. They're not discreet about it, how arrogant they are. And there's no issue. And many of the Africans in these countries, oh, colonialism is over. It's past. It's not about colonialism. It's about tribalism. It's about our government. We got to let that colonialism stuff go. There's no racism. You know, there is no racism. You know, you Black Americans talk about racism. There is no racism. That's usually the narrative when it comes to dealing with colonialism in the majority of the African countries I've been to. But for some reason, when it comes to Liberia, and when we discuss African Americans coming back to Africa, you know, if you discuss Europeans coming to Africa, no issue. Chinese, no issue. Europeans, even with their history of colonialism, no one has a problem. But for some reason, when it comes to Black Americans coming back to Africa and helping build, they always bring up the Liberia situation. They always bring up, look what the Black Americans did to Liberia. So I had Brother Davis come on yesterday. This is a long intro. Excuse me, Brother Morgan. I'm gonna give you the platform. I just got to just build it up.
Take your time.
Brother Davis came on yesterday and made the case of why Black Americans or the Americos who settled in Liberia, why they are wrongfully blamed, or why they get take the majority of the blame when it comes to what happened in Liberia. In his case, he made a very great point of case, but many people were upset. But his case, I mean, everything he said made sense. But the issue I have is there are many, I would say, indigenous Liberians who do not properly refute or can't refute what Brother Davis said. So I have Brother Morgan here. Brother Morgan, now are you Liberian?
Yes, I was born in Liberia. Yes.
You're okay. Now, what are you? Are you Americo or are you?
Well, I'm a mixture of both. Like most of the people I know. I mean, you know, like most Liberians are, and it's assimilated. We are, and basically an assimilated people. We're a mixture, a Pan-African mixture of Black people from everywhere. Indigenous Africans, people, immigrants from America and the Caribbean, recaptives off the slave ships from the Congo, Nigeria, from the Niger Delta, Igbos, Fon, Akan. We're a mixture of all that, and plus immigrants from all over Africa, attracted to Liberia in the 50s and 60s by the American dollar and the relative prosperity and stability that Liberia enjoyed in that period. So we're really a cornucopia, Pan-African in essence. We are Pan-African people, a mixture of Africans from everywhere, really. And my grandparents came from Barbados in the 1860s. And great-grandparents, they were part of a large group of Bajans that moved to Liberia. About 366 Barbadians immigrated to Liberia in 1865. My grandparents were part of that group. And my father's father is also from Barbados, but his mother is a crew, an indigenous crew. And then I have Bassa, Fulani, Fon, crew, Bajan, and American. And that is quite typical of most of the Liberians I know personally.
Okay, can you please define, because you mentioned Barbados, the islands. So can you please define what exactly is an Americo? And are these people, other Black people from the islands, are they included in this Americo, I guess, class or whatever you want to call it?
That's a good question, because actually there's no such thing as an Americo-Liberian. I mean, there may have been in the beginning. I mean, the founders of the country, I mean, the builders, the original builders were born in America, all of them. So I guess that would apply to them in the 19th century. But after a century and a half of assimilation from the gate, from the outset, there's no such thing as an Americo-Liberian. And this Americo-Liberian terminology actually groups together a Pan-African spectrum of people, indigenous people, like I said before, immigrants, about 13,000 in total from the United States, a few thousand more from the Caribbean, about 5,000 recaptives of the interdicted slave ships interdicted by the United States Navy, and indigenous people. So the Americo-Liberian terminology is false and misleading. It's erroneous. I mean, because it lumps together a whole group of people, some of whom have no connection ancestrally to America at all. Most of them. Liberians are an assimilated people. You know, they're a mixture of Americans, Caribbean people, recaptives, and indigenous people, and immigrants from all over Africa. In my book, there's no such thing as an Americo-Liberian.
Okay, so when did the, I guess, Americo-Liberian fail, like no longer exist? Like when did they start mixing the, I guess, the free slaves from America who came to Liberia?
All right, well, the free Black people and manumitted slaves, they started assimilating with the local people from the outset. A demographic breakdown of the colony in the 1830s gave the civilized population, civilized quote unquote, meaning westernized. No implications of inferiority or superiority. Civilized simply meaning westernized. They gave the breakdown as 50-50 immigrant and indigenous. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry.
No, I'm listening. Go ahead. I was just agreeing. Go ahead.
Yeah, in other words, the civilized population was 50-50 immigrants and indigenous. Mm-hmm. And that's because that's due largely to the fact that Western civilization was already there when the Americans got there. They didn't bring it there.
Okay, what do you mean Western civilization was already there?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the West Africans have been trading with the Europeans since the 1400s, since the 15th century. They were no strangers to Western culture. They already, some of them were westernized and educated. when the settlers got there. A vast number of the Grable and the Crew people in the southeast were educated, westernized, and affluent from centuries of trading with the Europeans. They had Western names. Some of the chiefs and kings that the first immigrants interacted with had Western names. King Joe Harris, King Peter Harris, King Freeman. A lot of these people worked on British ships and acquired Western names that way. Some of them were educated in the Gold Coast and in Sierra Leone, the British colony of Sierra Leone, and they also took on Western names. Some were educated by missionaries; they took on Western names, and so Western culture was already on that coast when the Black Americans got there. So they didn't bring it there.
Okay, because usually the argument is okay. So let's back up for a second, or move forward. So when the Americo-Liberians showed up to Liberia, is it true that the tribes that were there that they were participating in the slave trade?
Oh yes, that is true. I mean, sometimes the slavery business business is what it was. Basically boiled down to slave or being enslaved. I mean, everybody was involved, either as a slaver or an enslaver or an enabler. I mean, a popular misconception is that the crew people were not active participants.
Whoa, okay, listen.
Okay,
Listen. So I got. Let me read. Keep going. I'm gonna find this comment for you, but go ahead and keep going. I'm gonna find this comment about the crew people. Go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, the popular misconception is that they were not active participants in the trade. Well, it's true that they didn't enslave anyone, and they didn't make very good slaves because their pride was so much that they would rather be dead than be taken captive.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, people who took that stance were pretty much left alone by the enslavers, because it wasn't a good investment to try to enslave people that would rather kill themselves, would rather face death than be taken captive. So they were pretty much left alone, but they were seamen, they were mariners historically, the crew people. And their skill with canoes in the dangerous surf was well renowned by their first recorded contact with the Portuguese in the 1400s. So they worked on the slave ships. They loaded the slave ships.
You said
they guided the slave ships.
Who the crew people?
Yeah, they were mariners. The slavers, all shipping on that coast, on the West African coast, on the Windward coast, or whatever we called it, depended on crew people and their skill with canoes. So everybody was an active participant. I mean, some Basel kingdoms, their main economic mainstay was salt and the slave trade, capturing, raiding villages for slaves. The Mandingos and the Vais in the West. I mean, their main business was, capturing, making slave raids and turning people into chattel. Yeah, they were all involved. To be fair and balanced, when the Americans got there, everyone knew they were going to stop the trade. So, they encountered initial resistance from the local people, the Day people, some elements of the Bassa, the Mamba and Bassa, and the Five people, because, they knew the Americans were going to put a stop to their hustle, the slave trade, basically. But other elements of these same groups were also against the slave trade. They welcomed the American settlers, and they aided them, and they also participated in their campaigns to end the slave trade. The early settlers had to fight major battles against slave traders, entrenched slave traders, to end the slave trade on that coast. And I'm sorry, but some elements of the Bassa people also participated in these military campaigns against the slave traders, and eventually the Vais came around to ending voluntarily their role in the slave trade.
Okay, so when people say, okay, so the Americos are in Liberia, when people say that the Americos were sellouts from America, that they were working hand in hand with the CIA, and you know that they were serving the best interests of the white people back in America, what would be your response to that?
Well, I've never heard it put quite that way before, but no, the so-called Americos, which I have a problem with, were an oppressed African people. You know what I mean? You know, they could not enjoy full citizenship rights in the land of their birth, the United States. And so when they were offered this chance to go to Africa, the land of their fathers, and build their own country, I mean, even though most Black Americans at that time were opposed to colonization, a few brave souls were willing to take this enormous leap of faith, go to Africa and build their own country. That would be a haven for African descendants from everywhere, from America, Caribbean, or from Africa, or wherever. So these were proud people, hardworking people who were basically struggling for survival throughout most of their history. So no, they weren't agents. They were just Black people struggling for survival, is my interpretation.
Okay, so when people say that they were in bed with the U.S. government, were serving the best interest of the U.S. government, that they were government agents there to protect the interest of the U.S. government, you're saying that's false?
Yes, I'm saying that's false. That's false because for most of Liberian history, we resisted American influence in our political affairs. We resisted American capital for over a century because of Liberians historically were very proud of their independence from European rule, and they knew that foreign capital would mean foreign control. So they resisted foreign capital for the longest. And even with the coming of Firestone in 1926.
Listen, stop right there. Let's talk about Firestone, because that's another example people give in regards to this is proof that the Americos were hand in hand working with the CIA and the racists over in America to serve the best interests of white people in America. Go ahead and tell us about Firestone.
Okay, with the coming of Firestone in 1926, there was violent resistance to that. I mean, there was violence in the streets of Monrovia against American citizens.
The white citizens or the Americos?
Yeah, white citizens, white Americans in Monrovia were physically attacked by Liberians over the coming of Firestone. That's how much anger and resistance there was to this deal. Now, Liberia entered into that agreement with Firestone because they had no choice. Because of bad loans taken in England in 1871, Liberia's very sovereignty was mortgaged virtually to British banks. In the late 1800s, early 1900s was a very rough period for Liberia. I mean, the country was broke, bankrupt. So they had no choice but to enter into this agreement with Firestone. In order to generate revenue to pay the debts to save their sovereignty.
Okay, because people make it seem as if it was a crooked, shady Americo deal in regards to this Firestone deal, but you're saying it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. Actually, the land that was leased to Firestone for the plantation, the largest rubber plantation in the world for a long time, was initially allocated to the UNIA, Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association.
Wow.
The Liberia project was, you know about the Liberia project. I don't have to, but Anyway,
well, the Liberia project was the original project to send the Americos to the free slaves to Liberia, right?
no,
Oh,
the Liberia project was Marcus Garvey's idea of a Pan-African empire that would work for the decolonization of Africa in the short term, and for the improvement and well-being of Africans all over the world in the long term. Now, Marcus Garvey's UNIA and the Liberian government entered into an agreement in the early 1920s to use Liberia as a beachhead for that's why it was called the Liberia Project. UNIA would send ships full of people and supplies, to build a colony, to build an African homeland, on the continent. Now, this was a threat to colonization. I mean, Liberia was surrounded by colonial powers, Britain and France, and so when they got wind of this idea, of the Liberia Project, they put pressure on Liberia. I mean, there are reports that the United States ambassador actually threatened an invasion.
Hold on, so threatened invasion on Liberia if they didn't take the Firestone deal.
If they let the UNIA in, if they let the UNIA establish this get this Liberia project off the ground. Yeah, I mean, actually threatened invasion.
Wow.
He actually told the president that, the ambassador to the president that at a state dinner at the U.S. mission, and the President Charles D.B. King at that time told the Secretary of State Edwin Barclay what the ambassador had said. Edwin Barclay complained to the United States State Department, who of course distanced themselves from that vague threat by the ambassador, but it was implied that Liberia would basically lose its sovereignty if they let the UNIA in. And in the precarious position that it was in, her very sovereignty mortgaged to British banks, surrounded by military powers, colonial powers, we were in a very precarious position. Now, Marcus Garvey promised to take care of Liberia's debts, as an alternative to American finance, which Americans were resisting. The U.S. government was offering a $5 million loan that Liberians didn't want. And as an alternative to that, Marcus Garvey was going to step in and lend Liberia the money to get out of her troubles. But Marcus Garvey ran into his own financial troubles in the U.S. with the collapse of the Black Star Line and his own legal troubles. He couldn't come through. He couldn't meet his end of the bargain. So, and Liberia was still stuck with the problem of maintaining her sovereignty, which was paramount all throughout Liberia's history. Maintaining her sovereignty as a free Black republic was the most important thing. So they had to back out of this agreement. Even though the land was already set aside, supplies had already been landed, Liberia had to back out of the UNIA agreement. And in this place came Firestone.
So do you think that the America wanted to stop the UNIA in order to have Firestone come in and get that land?
Well, I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but if you look at history, all throughout history, every successful Pan-African venture has been seen as a threat to the global order. Obviously, a UNIA Pan-African empire in Africa was seen as a threat.
Right.
A serious threat.
So explain, because you mentioned that when Firestone came or tried to come the first time, that white people, like the Liberians, rejected it or were fighting white people in the street. How did Firestone present itself? Was it a hostile takeover at first when it was resisted, or what happened the first time when it fell through?
Nah, it never fell through. Once the government, publicized that they were entering into an agreement with Firestone, there was a public outcry and resistance, but the populace probably eventually came around to see the government's point of view, and they had to enter into this agreement to save their sovereignty. They had no choice.
Okay, so you have the Firestone deal. Like, how's Liberia right now? So this is another question I want to ask you. The first Liberian presidents, okay, were they white or were they mulatto? Because they look white.
Yeah, well, some of the first few presidents. Well, the first president, Joseph Jenkins Roberts, was an octoroon. Now, according under America's confusing race laws at that time, an octoroon was the person who was 1/8 African, and that's what J.J. Roberts was. In other words, he could pass as a white man if he wanted to.
Right. Well, yeah, of course, yeah.
And a few of them were that light. I mean, a lot of them were the children of the planters, the slave owners,
right?
Illegitimate children, So yeah, a lot of them were very light, and initially there was some overblown, exaggerated friction, between the mulattoes and the darker skinned people. It was exaggerated. I mean, for political purposes, but the politics initially was dominated by the mulattoes because they were usually affluent and wealthy, educated. On the average, they went to Liberia with money. They went there and set up trading. Became very wealthy from trading. I mean, just like lighter skinned people here in America, where the upper class, composed most of the black upper class. It was the same case in Liberia. Most of the upper class was mulatto.
Okay.
And they dominated politics, the Republican Party, until 1870, when the True Whig Party defeated the Republican Party. The True Whig Party was a coalition of indigenous people, upriver farmers, darker skinned people, the recaptives from the Congo, and their agenda was to establish a real black republic, because the way they saw it, in the words of one Republican partisan back then, J.J. Roberts is a very fine gentleman. I'm quoting this guy now. J.J. Roberts is a very fine gentleman, but he's more white than black. Benson, Stephen Allen Benson, J.J. Roberts' successor. He was J.J. Roberts' vice president, and he became the second president of Liberia. Benson is colored people all over, in the words of this early Republican parties. So, the Tory party's agenda, was pure, unadulterated black African self-determination. Now, it played out that way. And there was actual warfare between the two groups around that election. The Republicans deposed the Tory party president, Edward James Roy. He's from Newark, Ohio. They deposed him over allegations of fraud, financial fraud, and dictatorial intent. But that friction was resolved by the nonpartisan approach of the guy who succeeded Edward James Roy.
Okay, vice president James we can back up for a second. You said so there was you said a war, or was it just friction?
Yeah, there was actual street warfare. There was actually
who was the war between again?
Yeah, the country was on the brink of a civil war between the Republican Party and the Tory Party.
Okay, now, the Republican Party, were they the Americos or
the Republican Party? Both parties were composed of Americos, if you want to call them that.
Okay, so Americos were so when this first civil war almost broke out, you're saying Americos were in both parties.
Yeah, but membership in both parties overlapped. Even though the Republican Party was dominated by the mulattoes, excuse me, membership in both parties overlap. Some two-way party presidents were mulatto, and Stephen Allen Benson, J.J. Roberts' successor, he was a Republican. He was a dark-skinned African. This colorism thing was blown out of proportion for political purposes. But as I was saying, James Skipping Smith, E.J. Roy's vice president, when he took over as acting president, he took a nonpartisan approach to the crisis, and that brought the two parties together. And they actually merged into one party, the True Weak Party. The Republican Party actually disappeared from the scene. So mulattoes and darker-skinned Africans, whatever, he recapped his indigenous. I mean, they all reconciled their differences and became one national party, the True Weak Party. So that colorism thing was blown way out of proportion. But it was a part. It was an aspect of early history. Yes.
Okay, so where did this friction between the Americos and indigenous people come from? Or like, what is it? Explain the friction.
Okay, the friction came from basically cultural differences and ignorance. I mean, on the part of, on both sides, actually on the part of the settlers, because they didn't know these people. I mean, they didn't know what was in the interior. They had a 40-mile territorial jurisdiction, and they didn't know what was in the rainforest beyond their coastal settlements. You know, so a lot of ignorance was part of that, and also an important factor was I'm sorry, but an important factor was that the country was surrounded by the colonial powers, and they occasionally used would manipulate some indigenous kingdoms into going to war with Liberia, all with the goal towards taking over Liberian territory.
Okay.
So a lot of friction came from the fact that some of the indigenous kingdoms were allied with the British. The Crews were, for instance, the Crew people, they were very closely allied with the British. And in one of their uprisings in 1915, they actually hoisted the British flag on the territory. They openly expressed the preference for British rule.
You said the crew people.
Yeah. So a lot of this friction.
Now, the Crew people were the people that resisted slavery, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I just want to get that straight. Okay. And the Crew, yeah. They're also a large population in the Ivory Coast, correct?
Yes, Ivory Coast. Yes.
Okay. And you're saying the Crew had aligned with the British?
Yes, they have been trading with the British,
okay.
And had close relations with the British for centuries before Liberia was established.
Okay.
So they openly expressed
more time. Did the Crew capture slaves and trade them?
No, the Crew did not engage in slave raids or slave trading.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Yeah, they actually preferred British rule. So a lot of friction came from that, from the threat of being colonized by European powers. That was an actual danger.
Okay.
And then the slave trade, that was another point of friction. I mean, the early settlers actually saw slave ships being loaded right in front of them. So a lot of friction came from the fact that slave trade was still ongoing, and a lot of cultural practices. The American settlers saw as barbaric. I mean, they condemned as barbaric. Again, was a big source of this friction. It was an equal mix of friction and cooperation. Liberia could not have expanded its territory without cooperation. Most of its territory was acquired through treaty with local people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but you're saying the friction started because when Americans got to Liberia, they were seeing Africans being slave traded. Now, am I correct?
Yeah, the slave trade was a source of friction.
Okay.
The threat of colonialism was I mean, being colonized by European power was a source of friction, and cultural differences were a source of friction. I mean, some local people insisted, that settlers, embrace their culture, and submit to their laws, which they were not willing to do because, I mean, I guess they saw Westernization as the wave of the future. And they wouldn't, I mean, several scholars have noted that, have acknowledged that they wouldn't have survived for 1 week as an African state if that tried to, to assimilate into the existing culture instead of create a transcending national identity out of these various cultures. They wouldn't have lasted a week. I mean, they had to be closely allied with the U.S. for survival. That was the only protector, the United States. I mean, several times when the threat of annihilation was upon them, by stronger groups, the Gribbles and the Crews, they were far stronger militarily and economically than than Liberia. So several times they came very close to wiping Liberia off the map, and in each case, the only thing that saved that country was the United States Navy sending a gunboat. So, I mean, they had to remain closely allied with the U.S. for their survival. I mean, if you look at the Liberian flag, people criticize why is the Liberian flag so closely resemble the United States flag? It's just a copy, they would, but there were strategic reasons for that.
Okay, so let me ask you, why would the U.S. was trying to get rid of these slaves that they had no clue what to do with? Why would they be interested in making sure they were okay once in Liberia?
They would be interested because they had interest there. One of the main reasons President James Monroe gave his support to the American Colonization Society in his efforts to establish a colony for free blacks was American interest. I mean, it wasn't all altruistic, I mean, they had an interest on that coast. That was the geographic, importance of shipping, shipping interests, commercial interests. They were all monopolized by the British and the French. The Americans didn't have a foothold on that coast. And their shipping was always American shipping was always getting attacked and robbed by the people down the coast, especially the crew people. So there were a lot of reasons America had an interest in establishing Liberia. It wasn't just as a haven for free blacks. It was also a beachhead for American interests.
Okay, so if it's a beachhead for American interests, you don't think that the Americans were, again, working in the best interests of America and not, I guess, Liberians as a whole? Or now the question is, if Americans are protecting American interests, wouldn't that make them, I guess, somewhat agents or whatnot?
Well, the early Liberians were adept at balancing their interests, which was primarily the maintenance of the sovereignty to stay independent from European rule, with American interests. They were very adept at that. And American interests in Liberia fluctuated depending on the administration in power, domestic preoccupations. They weren't always interested in Liberia. I mean, their interests weren't always strong there, but initially it was for shipping, and then as those needs, but then as both countries decolonized and more African countries became independent, the interests shifted to not so much shipping, but geopolitical, ideological, friction between the East and West, the Cold War interests. So Liberia was they had to play this delicate balancing act between their interests their obligations to Africa and African solidarity and to the United States. I mean, because they were indebted to this country. I mean, that was the protector. That was their only ally for a long time, the United States. The strongest, their only protector. So, and now Tubman, President Tubman, in the post-World War II era, he was a master of this game, of balancing Liberia's interests and obligations to Africa against that, against their obligations, to the U.S. interests. Tubman knew how to play that game. He maximized the benefits to his country. He safeguarded American interests, and at the same time, he fulfilled his obligations to African unity and solidarity. His successor, President Tubman, was not as adept at this geopolitical balancing act. His policies came into conflict with American interests. His policies were more Pan-African and less pro-U.S. He deviated from the solidly pro-U.S. positions of his predecessor, and he supported African liberation groups, even those headed by avowed Marxists and radical African nationalists. He broke relations with Israel in '73. For purposes of African solidarity. He challenged the United States 24-hour landing notice for using Roberts Field as a shipping point for arms to Angola, the UNIA rebels in Angola. He renegotiated concession agreements, including Firestone and large iron ore mining concessions. All of this ran contrary to American interests. But no, they were not agents. Okay. They just learned how to balance their interests with that of their benefactor.
Got it. Okay. So somebody asked about another issue that Americos ran into as well. That caused friction was they noticed that some of the indigenous people were were practicing human sacrifice and cannibalism. What's your take on that?
That's a good question. Dinah, could I ask you to hold on for 1 second?
Oh, no problem. All right, cool. All right, everybody. Hope you guys are enjoying the show. As always, if you super chat, you get a postcard. I will send you a postcard of a super chat. So everybody, thank you so much for coming on. Make sure you get the likes up. If you're not super chatting, make sure you're sharing the video. But again, when you super chat, you will get a postcard. All right, appreciate it. And I hope you guys are enjoying the information, because we never really hear the Americo side. It's pretty much indigenous side. The Americos were evil and they oppressed us, and that's it. And that's the reason why Black Americans coming back to Africa will never work, because of the Liberian example. And that's it. That's all you really ever hear. So I just, again, wanted to bring somebody on with knowledge of it. Yeah, I got your address. Your card will be sent out tomorrow. Everybody's card from this weekend will be sent out tomorrow. So, but yeah, I got your address. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate it, Sultan. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. So I'm glad you guys are enjoying the conversation tonight. I'm glad you are. Again, like, share, super chat. Oh, I will be in Nigeria in August for the Osun Festival. I will be in Nigeria in August. So, I would definitely be documenting that. So, yeah. Panther Red, I already pretty much did a review on Black Panther for the most part. For the most part, I did already. Somewhat. And then we somewhat did one yesterday too, Panther, the show I did with Professor David. So you can check that out as well. So yeah.
I'm back. Anytime you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead. We were talking, man, where did we leave off? The cannibalism in the human sacrifice.
Well, cannibalism and human sacrifice. Oh my God. Well, that's been a problem. I mean, since before Liberia was founded. I mean, there's some secret societies that engage in that. And um, the Liberian government in the 1930s cracked down on these secret societies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, President Barkley said that there were people selling human flesh in the markets. I mean, that's been a problem all over Africa, I would dare say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, time immemorial, these secret societies that engage in, human sacrifice. But the Liberian government did its best throughout history, to curtail these practices, but at least keep them in check. I mean, we saw them. I mean, come back, rise again to the fore after. I mean, with the outbreak of the war in the 1990s, we saw cannibalism on international TV. And human sacrifice was an integral part of the war. I mean, some factions would sacrifice babies, before battle. So, what was the question regarding this?
No, they were just saying people, if that was one of the issues that I guess the Africans had with the indigenous people was, they witnessed slave trading going on, they witnessed human sacrifice and cannibalism going on. So that's why we're asking that.
Yes, that was a point of contention between them. Yes, these practices, some of these cultural practices that the American settlers frowned upon, and for that they were accused of considering themselves superior to the indigenous people, because they embrace Western culture as a standard of civilization. But that's something that the whole world has done. The entire continent of Africa has also done that. Embrace Western culture as a standard of civilization.
Right.
So, and that's usually cited as proof of an oppressive system. The fact that the criteria for assimilation into society was Westernization. The more Westernized you were, the more easily you navigate this Western system. Mm-hmm. That's often cited as as proof of this cultural arrogance on the part of the Liberians from America, that they consider themselves superior. But that's a bogus argument, because the entire world has embraced Western culture as the standard of civilization. The entire continent of Africa has done the same. So this is rather hypocritical for people who accuse the Liberia's founders of cultural arrogance or considering themselves superior, quote unquote, because they were basically Westerners.
Mm.
I mean,
go ahead. I'm sorry. No.
I mean, it go throughout the African diaspora. I mean, into the Caribbean, Haiti, Jamaica. I mean, country people are on the bottom, and the more Westernized you are, probably better off you are, and the more African you are, like the country people, the rural people of Jamaica and Haiti. They also call country people like indigenous people in Liberia were, but not like indigenous people as a group. Country people were people who were country. I mean, rural people, unsophisticated people, usually uneducated people. That's how all over the world. That's what country people are: rural, simple, unsophisticated people. Right. These same terms were applied in Liberia. But they've been interpreted as some assertion of superiority. I mean, the Liberians never said that they were superior to anybody. So where did this idea come from?
Mm-hmm.
I read the other day a scholarly paper. I forgot who wrote it, but he said he said that the Americo-Liberians felt they have feelings of superiority over the indigenous Africans, and I'm like, how would he know that? How would he know how long dead people felt without them ever giving voice to such a sentiment? They never said they were superior. I think a lot of resentment against the founders, whatever you want to call them, the Americo-Liberians, stems from that idea, false idea, bogus idea, but an idea nevertheless,
Mm-hmm.
that the Americo-Liberians consider themselves superior to the indigenous people. I think that blinds a whole lot of people to reason and logic and to an impartial and objective and comprehensive interpretation of Liberian history. That's just that one idea that these ex-slaves, consider themselves superior to us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that has a lot to do with the resentment against, these people versus European colonizers. You don't, like you said before at the beginning of the program, you don't see this kind of venom and resentment. Against the European colonizers, who pretty much did the same thing, try to civilize,
Worse, but worse.
quote unquote. Yeah, far worse. Far worse. But you don't see that kind of resentment against them. And there's a lot of superiority sentiments among the indigenous ethnic groups. Those who enslaved others, they look down on those that they enslaved. So maybe this idea that they look down on people who were slaves. So that could be part of the resentment that these ex-slaves, came and considered themselves superior to us. But that may be too general, because most Liberians don't think in those terms. They don't feel that resentment. Most of this resentment that you and I hear all the time, especially on the internet, or from some Liberians, is most of it's a minority view. It's politics basically. Most Liberians, have long since moved past that that stage in their history, that friction, that divide, that divide is largely imaginary now. For years, since the 40s, 1940s, when President Tubman launched his unification program, to unify the country. For the first time in history, these 16 ethnic groups stop fighting each other, enslaving each other, and come together and form one country.
So you say, okay, so you say by the 1940s,
1945.
this beef was pretty much gone.
Yeah, since 1945, when President Tubman launched his unification policy, the country began to move past. The country was moving past that from the early 1900s under President Arthur Barclay. There was still resistance to unification and integration. Again, because of the threat of colonization by European powers, and the resistance to the foreign capital. But Tubman succeeded because he had the Gribbles at his back, and as I said before, the Gribbles were very military force to contend with, and having them at his back enabled him to get the unification program across, to succeed in the unification program. But since the 40s, from the 40s to 1980, when the government was overthrown, the country had largely moved past that stage. So today, most Liberians don't think in those terms. Of that divide. That divide is largely imaginary, and it's only real to people who have a political agenda or divisive agenda. Foreign powers invested in Liberia. They have an interest in maintaining division. That's why they insist on, calling people Americo-Liberians and freed slaves, and natives, and indigenous. It's beneficial to them, to foreign powers, and to politicians in Liberia.
So let's speed up to William Tolbert. So how was Liberia when, is it William Tolbert? Is that his name?
Yeah, William Tolbert, yes.
I was like, how was Liberia when William Tolbert was in office?
William Tolbert came into office at a very crucial time in Liberia's history. His predecessor, President Tubman, died in 1971. And Tolbert had been his vice president for 19 years. Now, Tolbert took office in 1972. The world energy crisis was taking shape. Iron and rubber prices were dropping. Those were part of Liberia's economic mainstay. So he came into power at a time of financial crisis. The 50s and 60s have been very prosperous. Liberia had a GDP equal to Japan, growth rate on par with Japan, and we had a currency that was on par with the American dollar. Which not too many countries can boast of. Very few countries can boast of a currency interchangeably in circulation with the U.S. dollar. But that prosperity was in trouble in the early 70s, against the energy crunch and falling raw material prices. And then Tolbert had a vision. He had a vision to remake Liberia 180 degree turn from his predecessor. Tubman was pro-U.S., anti-communist, anti-socialist, solidly pro-U.S. Tolbert was pro-U.S. also. He was also anti-communist, anti-socialist. But he also had some strong Pan-African ideals that clashed with this solidly pro-U.S. foreign policy that Liberia historically had. And when he began to deviate from that, to take positions that were contrary to American interests, he ran into trouble. And these, he was a lot more liberal than Tubman. Under Tubman, there was no free press, no dissent, period. He allowed no dissent at all. Tolbert liberalized society, to free press. You could say whatever you wanted, criticize the government. And enemies, his enemies took advantage of that to destabilize the country and overthrow him, over these.
Okay, so why did Doe assassinate or why was there a coup d'etat with Doe and taking out Tolbert?
You say why?
The coup d'etat when Samuel Doe took out Tolbert. If I guess Liberia was doing good, why did Doe take out Tolbert?
Well, why did Doe take out Tolbert? It depends on who you ask. If you ask some people, they would say that it was an uprising against the Americo-Liberians. It was an indigenous revolution. If you ask other people, they'll say that Doe was installed by outside forces, by external forces with vested interests in Liberia, who saw their interests threatened by the liberal political atmosphere that Tolbert created. Why Tubman allowed no dissent, Tolbert did. And apparently these outside forces saw that Tolbert did not have the capability or the will to suppress this democratic movement that was arising in the 70s. This democratic reform movement. University students calling for democratic reform. They saw that Talbot was not able to crush dissent, to keep dissent suppressed as Tupman did. So I mean, a lot of people will argue that it was a preemptive strike by forces vested in people vested in Liberia, to protect their interests. And some people would say it was a combination of both.
Hmm. So Tolbert gets into, I mean, Doe is now in office. The what happens once Doe was in office? What happens to the Americo-Liberians?
Well, after the military coup, it was a reign of terror. I mean, Tolbert was assassinated, and his entire cabinet was rounded up and stripped naked and paraded to the streets.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that the video. It was very disgusting. But go ahead.
Yeah, and executed, on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was a clear lynching. I mean, if you look at it, you look at the eerie similarities between the case of Lumumba in the Congo. I mean, this was clearly a lynching by imperialist forces of a government of uppity Negroes. But I mean, a lot of people don't see it that way. I mean, they either don't see, I mean, the role of foreign powers in it, or they don't care who was behind it. They just wanted a change. In other words, not a change of system, not a revolution, not to change the system, but to change the people who were. They just had a resentment against the people who were running the government, not the system of governance, because they continued the same old system of governance, the same old constitution. They made a whole big noise about writing a new constitution after the coup. But if you look at it, it's the exact same constitution of 1847, no change whatsoever. There was no need to change any laws because there was no discrimination enshrined in the laws as there would be in an oppressive system, an exclusionary system. All right. I mean, they continued the same old system. They paid less attention to cultural development, to Liberian African cultural promotion and preservation than the Talbot government, that the so-called Americo-Liberian governments did. So there was no change whatsoever in the system. There was an element of resentment against these people. Even on the part of indigenous people that were part of the ruling upper class, there was hidden resentment among them. So.
Okay, so Doe was in office. What causes the next coup d'etat? What I guess is that Prince Johnson and Charles Taylor.
Well, yeah, the country got caught in a downward spiral immediately after the coup. I mean, just shortly after the coup, the currency fell from 1-to-1 against the U.S. dollar to like 1,000 to 1. Now it's like maybe I don't know how many 100,000 to 1 U.S. dollar. I mean, the economy went straight down the toilet. I mean, all these 5-year, long-term, 5-year, 10-year, long-term development plans of the public government all disappeared. I mean, there was no development taking place after 1980. No significant U.S. technical assistance or investment since the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the country just went downhill after the coup. So.
Okay, and so before the coup, were there a large number of Liberians fleeing under Americo rule to America, back to America? Were there a large number of Liberians fleeing under Americo rule to America?
There's no one fleeing. I mean, Liberians would come to the U.S. and get their college education and go back. Before the coup, they didn't flock to this country in such large numbers as they do today. I mean, they didn't need to. People actually came from all over Africa, all over the world to Liberia seeking, higher standards of living, and jobs, education. before the coup. Now, I mean, after the coup, I mean, the economy went downhill and tribalism reared its ugly head because, like I said before, for a century and a half, these this fratricidal conflict, was kept, in check by the First Republic. Not by Americo-Liberians, but by the Liberian First Republic, a republic made up of Americans and indigenous Africans and recaptives and immigrants from all over Africa. I mean, for 100 century and a half, that kept these ugly aspects of our African culture, in check. And all of this was just unleashed in the late 80s. Because those fighters and fighters, just a few years, a year or so after the coup, he started to purge the rank and file of the military of everybody who wasn't of his ethnic group, the brown people. And then,
I was gonna say that the TV in the background is kind of loud. All right, cool. Appreciate it.
Is that better?
Yeah, it's a whole lot better. All right, so Doe's in office, and then Prince Johnson, correct, and Charles Taylor come in and get rid of Doe, or what happened with that?
Yeah, Charles Taylor initially, well, he was one of the leaders of the opposition, in the late 70s, clamoring for democratic reform. But actually, his organization, PAL, the Progressive Alliance of Liberia, was formed in New York City, actually. And there was already an opposition movement, a democratic movement on the ground in Liberia, the Movement for Justice in Africa. They were basically calling for democratic reform. They were, college professors and students, basically mostly. But Charles Taylor's organization, formed in New York City, they held demonstrations in Manhattan when Tubman visited in '76, and demonstrated outside the Liberian mission to the United Nations. So President Tubman invited them home to see what was going on, to counter all the misinformation they were spewing or they were receiving. So he invited them back home, and when they went back home, they supplanted Moja as the main opposition group. And they were not calling for democratic reform. They were calling for the overthrow of the government. Charles Taylor, the Central Intelligence Agency admitted, not too long ago, that Charles Taylor was on their payroll. So he was actually sent in to destabilize the country. His organization, PAL, was actually a destabilization movement, stabilize the total government and prepare for its overthrow. But anyway, he worked for Doe immediately after the coup. As procurement, general services agency director. And Doe accused him of embezzlement. Taylor left the country and came to the U.S. Doe requested his extradition. The United States government arrested him, and they said he escaped.
Yeah, that's the funny part. Yeah.
They said he escaped from a federal detention facility.
Yeah, right.
Boston, I think it was.
How do you escape from a federal detention center and come back to Liberia and become president? Yeah.
Well, actually, some people feel that they actually sent him there to get rid of Doe because Doe had fallen into displeasure, with the Americans too, over finances again, over America not paying its fair share of rent on its facilities in Liberia, extensive facilities in Liberia, and renegotiation contracts again. He also fell into trouble. So a lot of people feel that South Taylor sent there to get rid of Doe. And anyway, he forms his group in the Ivory Coast. Prince Johnson is a member, and Prince Johnson breaks away, forms his own faction, and launches an incursion into Nimba County in the north. And that's how the war starts. Prince Johnson makes his way to Monrovia and captures Doe, with again some, I mean, there's strong evidence of complicity by international powers. Those captured and tortured to death on camera.
Right, I saw that.
And,
That was disgusting as well. Go ahead.
And all these tribal animosities that have been held in check by the First Republic for over a century, just came back to the fore. I mean, the crown people, those people against everybody else. This group against that group, this faction against that faction.
Hey, we can't hear. We're starting to lose you. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
That's better. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and it just grew into a free fall. All these factions fighting each other. I mean, with very loud tribal overtones.
Mm-hmm. All right, so okay, so now Samuel Doe, which tribe was he from?
The Klan tribe from the southeast on the border of the Ivory Coast.
Okay, Prince Johnson, what tribe was he from?
And he's from the Da and Mana, from Nimba County, on the border of the Ivory Coast. And
okay.
Those two ethnic groups were historical enemies. Again, over the slavery, and who was more primitive than the other. Anyway, those traditional historical animosity between those two groups.
Okay, and then Charles Taylor, which tribe was he from?
Charles Taylor was a mixture of, his father's people came from America, and his mother was an indigenous Gola woman.
Okay, so and then during this period, that's when Liberians started to flee to America, correct?
Yes, when the war broke out.
Okay, yes. So if Americans started to flee to, if Liberians started to flee to America during this period, when a so-called Americo wasn't in charge, why are Americos blamed for what's going on or the situation in Liberia?
Like I said, it's this resentment, this resentment against the fact that that the idea of superiority, cultural arrogance. I mean, and it also stems from the general African tendency, to always blame someone else, to always have someone else to blame for their problems. I mean, that's the only reason you blame long dead people, for you destroying your own country. I mean, actually, near total destruction of all infrastructure. How do you justify that?
Right.
You can't. So you have to discredit past governments. The governments that went before. You can't admit that that they had the country on the right track. And that you destroyed it. So that's where that tendency to blame country's founders for the problems that we're having today.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that's what I'm saying. It just didn't make sense because we always go with the narrative that the Americos, the Black Americans, were to blame for what happened in Liberia. But then it's like, okay, if Liberians weren't fleeing the country during Americo rule, but started fleeing the country once Samuel Doe, I'm sorry, was in power in the Civil War, which had nothing to do with the Americos. Okay, let me ask this. How can somebody pin the Civil War on Americos? Like, what reason can they use to blame Americos for the Civil War?
Well, the arguments I've heard is that, because of the century and a half of misrule, quote unquote, that's what I heard, because of the exclusion of the majority of the population for so long. It's a totally bogus argument that, because there was some exclusion in the past. No one can deny that. But the country, I mean, to its credit, moved past that and evolved into a united Pan-African country.
Right.
I mean, you know, from the 40s to 1980, the country was just coming into its own, both economically, you
Right.
know, and as a united nation. It was just coming into its own in 1980 when the total government was overthrown. I mean, just 40 years from 1945 to 1980. I mean, it was the first time that there were free of debts to European powers. And the first day they had, the first time they had a united country. I'm
I
sorry.
said the TV is real loud in the background.
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, that's better. That's better. All right. So somebody wants to know what role did I guess Western religion play in the Civil War, if any at all?
Western religion?
Yeah, like Christianity and Islam. Did that play a role in the war at all?
I don't understand the question.
Okay, did Western religion, did Christianity or Islam play a role in the Civil War?
I don't understand the question as to what role Christianity played in the war.
Yeah. Okay. Well, never mind. They're wondering if religion played a role in the Civil War.
Well, no, I mean not more role than religion played in any war. I think.
Okay. Let's see if we got any more questions in the chat room. Let's see here. Any more questions in the chat room?
I just want to say that I'm sorry.
Yeah. So basically, there's somebody was saying is the Americo-Liberians control every political, social, and economic power. They abuse the natives with impunity. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there's abuse in every system. I mean, whenever people have authority over others, there's going to be abuse. That's not unique to Liberia. That's not evidence of an oppressive system. I mean, injustice occurred, like it does in every society. And throughout its history, Liberia has made efforts to correct these injustices. I mean, it's just as much as every other country has tried to right the wrongs against a portion of its population, Liberia has done its share. I mean, injustice was perpetrated, by Liberians with power against Liberians without power. And that didn't matter whether it was Americo-Liberian or Indigenous. I mean, people with power abuse their power, like they do everywhere. But overall, I mean, if you look at the history of Liberia, you see an evolution from a colonial enclave besieged by hostile forces, colonial forces, threatened with European colonization and with jurisdiction over millions of indigenous people that they really don't understand, and more importantly, how they don't understand how to include these people into their system. It took them a while to figure it out, and to obtain the resources to do that. So you see an evolution from a colonial enclave to a united Pan-African nation. If there was an oppressive system, an exclusionary system in Liberia, the nationalists would have addressed it. People like Ahmed Sékou Touré of Guinea, radical socialist leading Sékou Touré, never said anything about Americo-Liberian oppression. He was a close friend of President Tubman and President Tubman. President Tubman's government guided Guinea and Ghana and Nigeria and a whole lot of other African countries in their transition to independence.
And none of these people, Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Toure, Modibo Keita, all the radicals that you can think of, none of them ever said a word about any Americo-Liberian oppression.
Mm.
This is mostly imaginary. These Americo-Liberians. You know, no one can deny that injustice occurred, but to say that it was an oppressive system is just not the evidence for it. Why didn't all these radical nationalists say anything? I mean, you know, President Togo was friends with the most radical African nationalists. Someone would have said something. Certainly, Kwame Nkrumah would have addressed it. If he saw Americo-Liberian oppression in Liberia, he certainly would have addressed it. Nkrumah certainly would have said something about it. Nnamdi Azikiwe, the first president of Nigeria, he wrote a book, Liberian World Politics, staunch defense of Liberia, Liberia's record. Yeah. You know, so um, there's no evidence of a system of oppression. There's plenty of evidence of snobbery, you know, and people thinking they're better than others, and abuse of power by corrupt district commissioners and chiefs and frontier force men. There's plenty of evidence of that, but evidence of systematic oppression, um, there was injustice against the unassimilated people. Like I said before, based on colonization was a big part of that, and basic human nature was a part of that. But you know, evidence does not support. If you look at the history, objectively, the evidence does not support a system of oppression.
Yeah, the people are saying they can't really hear you in the background, but I think we got a lot, man, and I think we all learned. Again, let's see. I have to disagree with him. There's the data were put down because the group that was sent there believed they were better. Yeah, everybody's still saying that pretty much the Americans thought they were superior to the native people. That's the argument that people are using or saying. But I think between you and Professor Davis, you guys pretty much stated, unless let me ask you, are there any Indigenous Liberians that you guys in the chat could find that would love to come on the platform and do a show and really go into detail as far as their side on what happened? Just shoot me an email. But from what I've gotten and gathered from Professor Davis and Brother Morgan is, I think the Americo-Liberians are wrongfully blamed. Because at the end of the day, when Indigenous or when Liberians started to flee the country to America, Americans weren't in power. Samuel Torport was Indigenous, Charles Taylor was mixed, and Prince Johnson was Indigenous. And that Civil War, and correct me if I'm wrong, did the Civil War involve Americans at all, Brother Morgan?
Yeah, they were involved. Like other Liberians were involved.
Okay. So this is the last question, and we'll go ahead and shut it down. What role did the Americos play in the Civil War?
I hate to to think in terms of Americos, but like all Liberians, a lot of them were opposed to Doe. They wanted him gone, and they supported the Association for Constitutional Democracy in Liberia. That was the organization that initially funded Charles Taylor's group.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Liberians wanted him gone, and that was across the spectrum, whether the Americo-Liberians or whatever. They initially supported Charles Taylor, and when they saw that, his dictatorial, tyrannical tendencies, most reasonable people withdrew their support. Liberians supported Charles Taylor. I hate to break it down that, the Americos and, Indigenous,
because you know, we really can't even tell who's indigenous or American. I mean, you know, people hear a name like Brownell and they automatically think America. You know, and that's not true. The Brownells are a Grable family. You know, I mean, you know, so many families. I mean, so many indigenous people with Western names, totally assimilated. I mean, like I said, the whole country. I mean, most of the population is assimilated. So how do you really tell, you know, who's American and who's indigenous? And that's what that comment about the Americans thought they were superior to the indigenous people. You know, I mean, it escapes me how people know how people thought without them ever, you know, voicing that sentiment that they were superior. I mean, how do you know they thought they were superior? You know.
Okay, so you're saying I guess I missed it. In the Civil War, were Americos involved in that Civil War?
All Liberians were involved in the war. I mean,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, of course there were Americans involved. You know, all Liberians were involved in it, or running away from it, or victims of it. You know, that ran across the board. I mean, you know,
Okay, cool. All right, brother. If, we can go ahead and close out. If you want to go ahead and give people your contact information, how they can reach you. And
yeah, I just wanted to say if I could in closing, right? I mean, Liberian history is complicated, very complicated, and I mean, but it's a rich history, a very complex history that, on closer study, should inspire pride among all people of African descent all over the world, whether you're indigenous Liberian or your ancestor came from Georgia or Maryland, or whether you're an African American or Caribbean or whatever. Liberia's history should inspire pride among, I mean, among, for all Black people. I mean, to survive as the only piece of free soil on almost the entire continent for over 100 years. I mean, against machinations by colonial powers to take away your sovereignty. Just survival for that long is an accomplishment in itself. And what Liberia achieved in the space of 40 years, from 1945 to 1980, I mean, all Africans should be proud of that. You know, I mean, I think if some Liberians could just get past that resentment over that idea of superiority, you know, I mean, that would enable them to see the richness and that the history is something to be proud of, not anything to be ashamed of. You know, but I thank you for giving me the chance to say that. And my organization is the Historical Preservation Society of Liberia. We have a website, hpso-liberia.net, and we have a Facebook page, Historical Preservation Society of Liberia. And we try to provide a balanced history of Liberia, contrary to the mostly negative historical coverage that's all over the place. You know, and if you want a balanced, comprehensive, objective view based on facts of Liberian history, and not a subjective view based on resentment or a political agenda, that it's a good place to learn it. We're still in the organizing stage, and about to establish a presence back home in Liberia, and we soon begin to our objective is preservation, historical preservation, and we will be formally organizing soon.
Oh, cool, perfect. All right, brother. I appreciate you coming on. Everybody, thank you for joining us in the chat tonight. Yeah, I did a video on that already earlier in regards to the future of Liberia. So I would say check out that video. But again, thank you for coming on. Search for Uhuru. Make sure you go to my Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and Facebook. Please subscribe, like if you're new to this page. Make sure you subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Everybody, this page is growing, so thank you so much for making that possible. Also, go to searchforhuru.com, go to dynastymirror.com, and go to amazon.com and search your name, Dynasty Mirror. Please buy a book. All right, you guys, till next time, peace.